So the next one is a video. The video is troubleshooting a crosswired or mispiped multi-zone mini split. At Matt, bunch of Z's and stuff. Is a cross in a cross-wired system, icing doesn't always happen. In fact, most of the time icing up didn't occur, so I had to use other indicators to figure out the correct piping sequence.
That's a good question.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Now, in order for icing to occur, I mean, there's not a lot of detail here, but in order for icing to occur, um, or let's say this: if my unit is not calling for cooling, my blower still runs.
Hmm.
Or if I had the blower set at medium or high, then the blower's on. Going to be kind of hard for me to ice up at that point.
Right.
But if I turn it off, most of the time, as we've seen, and maybe Daniel might be more apt to tell me exactly what he's seen. But most of the time, if you've got refrigerant flow and you don't have the blower on, you will start to get ice.
Yep.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's the test. Like if you were to call tech support, that's what we would tell you to do. Turn all of them off, turn one on in cool mode, and then see if that one actually cools. And then if that one does not actually cool, then go look for the one that's starting to frost. Which coil is cold? And that's
Yeah.
how you'll find your crossed wired.
Right. Yeah. So the point's not necessarily that ice occurs. I guess it's just which one's calling for which one's cooling and it's not supposed to be cooling.
These systems will try to adjust themselves the best they can because it knows what temperature the coil is through the coil temperature sensor. So it's going to try to adjust itself, the EEV, the compressor speed. It's going to try to avoid icing. The
Right.
It knows that icing's not great for
Right.
operation.
Now, that's also that's also taking into account that the unit would need to be looking at the coil temperature sensor if it's not calling for cooling in the first place.
Very
Like
true.
maybe the assumption is that it is installed correctly and it doesn't
Right.
have to worry about using the coil sensor on a unit that's off.
Right.
Maybe that unit's in a garage area. Maybe it's below freezing in that garage area, and now you can't get cooling in your server room or something. I don't know, something that would need cooling when it's that cold outside, right? So
Right.
like, maybe I do need to be able to ignore a space or a temperature sensor that is located in an area where I'm not responsible for heating and cooling at this moment. So why would I pay attention to it at all? And it could be that the multi-zone Gen 1 might be a little bit different than the multi-zone Gen 2, that kind of thing. There's a bunch of different reasons why. But another great way to determine whether or not something's going to be crosswired or mispiped is to not do that in the first place. So if you,
Yeah.
I've done it. I think everybody has at some point. And I know it's never that, it's never that, right? I've checked it, I've checked it, I've checked it. I don't know how many times we did a tech support call that I did where, I checked it, I checked it, I checked it. So it's like, okay, let's run through this thing real quick. Let's just, hey, I got to do it, or whatever. Let's run through this. We'll check this, we'll check that, that kind of thing. And yeah, it ends up being, crosswired and misplayed. I mean, we
One
don't
of the
have a problem.
funny,
We don't have a
one of the
problem taking somebody through that process. I mean, it's just we get it.
Right, right. One of the funniest things for me is when we determine that it's cross piped and what I'll hear is, but this thing's been installed for 2 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And you just now found out why is that? Because if all units are calling, then it's never going to ice up. You may never actually see the problem if all indoor units are calling. So it could go 2 years, 3 years, who knows, until your child, gets old enough to move out and go to college, and then that one room, you turn it off. And then all of a sudden you got problems.
Yeah, yeah. And that absolutely happens. If I am running at a low speed, or even worse, like if I'm running at medium or high speed, like the locked in speed during cooling, but particularly if I'm running at low speed and cooling, it may be such a small level of cooling effect at that point that nobody ever notices.
Right,
It may be
right.
even they walk by and is like, is that cold air? Oh, maybe it's just because it's blowing. You know, they definitely let you know when it's not cooling, but they might not let you know that it was cooling, and they don't really know why. You know? I mean, there's a lot of times that you run across a unit that's cooling like that, barely cooling, and it's doing everything it's supposed to do. So,
Yeah.
we can't go, well, it's been installed like this for however long. I will tell you one story real quick. Um, is I worked for a manufacturer that had a button that you could press that would run it through like a startup sequence to correct this cross wiring,
Hmm.
which was great until they would replace the board,
Oh.
and then the process would start all over again. Not knowing that it was cross pipe, not knowing that it was cross wired, that kind of thing, and then suddenly they're having to do it all over again. Well, it's been running like this for how many ever years?
For
There's no
how long?
way,
Yeah.
And one more, real quick. I went to a job. This is for a VRF system, but there's two different sets of wires, right? And they said, well, we marked them with tape. And I said, they pulled them through into the unit, and they said they marked them with tape. And I said, did you mark them with tape before you put it in the unit, or after you pulled it through? So what does that matter? Well, yeah, it was absolutely they were swapped, and that's what they did. They pulled the wire through, they pulled both sets through, and they went, okay, that one goes to wherever it's supposed to go, and they marked it with some tape. Well, they marked the wrong one. I mean, that's everybody does it. It's not a question of whether or not you're a good heating and air conditioning tech. How many times do you run, piping for a multi-zone system? Probably not 10,000 or something. That would it take to do it perfectly every single time. And
Yeah.
plus, if you got it, you can always blame it on a helper or something.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes. No one here's trying to, get on to anybody for a mistake. The goal's the same, right? We want it working for the customer.
Yeah, that's it.